All right. Are we there? Are all of our streaming things? Okay. Well, today is Friday. It's getting a little hard to tell the days of the week. It's very dreary in Halifax. Oh, maybe now we're live on all systems. All systems go. So technologically had enough of technology. I think we all have. It's Friday. It's very dreary in Halifax. We did not get the hail that Pennsylvania had, nor the snow that Massachusetts had. We're getting rain and wind and very mixes of horribleness. So our plan for a walk did not go forward. It's a pity because I'm really sleepy. Ooh, excuse me. So I have a number of books. When I was doing my master's in museum studies, I worked in the archive at George Washington University. And when I was there, they were getting rid of quite a lot of books. And so they would put them out for staff and students, whoever wanted them. And one of the piles of books that came out were a bunch of children's books that were being removed from the collection from the 40s and 50s. So I have quite a few books from that pile. And this is one of my favorite ones. It's very cute. It's very little. It's not quite a golden book, but it somehow is. So this book is called The Tugboat. And I'll show you. I should probably freighter. She starts an ocean liner on her way to Europe. She tows barges. And it's written by the editorial board. So it's of Grosset and Dunlap Inc. in New York. And what year did this? Okay. So this is interesting, especially if you are a teacher. This is not interesting for kids. My apologies if you are a smaller human. So the editorial board is comprised of a group of teachers within the Lincoln School of Teachers College at Columbia University. I'm going to guess that is now Bank Street School. They have a wide experience in teaching children of different age levels, in giving courses in language and literature, reading and curriculum making at various universities, and in writing for children. Well-known writers whose books for children have been available only in more expensive form are contributing. New writers with special ability and knowledge in various fields are collaborating with the editors. It's very interesting. I would have thought that writing by editorial board was miserable. So what year did this come out? I don't know. All right. Puff, puff, puff. The busy little tug, Joanna, steams down the river. Swish, she cuts the water in front of her. She splashes white spray all around. Little ripples run along behind. Out the Joanna hurries into the bay. Her captain is up in the pilot house. He steers Joanna's shining brass wheel. His eyes are watching every minute. He looks far out over the water. He is looking for the bell buoys that tell him where danger is. He watches the boats that are coming into the harbor. He watches the boats that are going out. Toot! He blows the long whistle to a ferry boat near him. The whistle says to the ferry boat, "Look out, ferry boat, I'm going to pass you on the port side." Back. Toot! Go ahead. On goes the Joanna. She leaves the ferry boat behind. The Joanna's captain looks out over the harbor. His eyes keep watching. Suddenly he says, here she comes. Here's the Nancy Brown. Now, Joanna, you must get to work. Come along and pull that clumsy old giant into her dock. Slowly, the Joanna steams along towards a great big freighter. The freighter is the Nancy Brown. She has a cargo of bananas in the hold. She comes from South America. Hello. The Nancy Brown sees Joanna coming. She waits. Her propellers hardly turn. The little Joanna puffs up along the side of the big freighter. No container ships this early. The Joanna's captain calls out to the mate high up on the deck of the Nancy Brown. Stand by, Mr. Mate. Here comes our rope. He shoots a rope up from the Joanna, high up to the bow of the Nancy Brown. A seaman on the Nancy Brown catches it. He makes it fast to the freighter. Yeah, you'll like this one, Jules. So I'll just so this story about throwing the line. It used to be that the lines had a monkey's fist, which is basically a rock wrapped in rope, and you'd throw that. And when I lived in Los Angeles, I talked to, and now what they use is like a pink bouncy ball or a neon orange bouncy ball that's attached to a rope, so that when you throw it, it bounces, and also it doesn't hurt as much as if it hits you. Because if you're a tug crew, you spend a lot of time throwing lines back and forth and catching lines. So I was told by a guy I met in Los Angeles who worked at the Port of Los Angeles, who worked on a tug crew, that some of the older ships will still have the monkey's fist with a rock in it. And it's a real problem because you don't assume that's what's coming at you. You assume it's a bouncy ball. And if they hit you, it really hurts because it's like someone throwing a rock at you attached to a rope from, way high up on top of a boat. So that's what they would have had. And my guess is they learned to step aside when the rope was headed towards them. And now they're not quite as concerned about that because the pain, because it's just a bouncy ball. So if you're ever on a boat, make sure you watch them when they throw the line to the dock or to a tugboat or to a pilot, because it looks really cool to see this ball. And then the thinner line that's attached to the ball, or the monkey's fist, is then attached to a bigger rope, so you can sort of pull to get the big rope you need. Anyway, back to our story. Chug, chug, along comes another tug. She shoots her rope up high to the freighter. The seamen of the Nancy Brown fasten it tight. The tug bumps its nose up against the stern of the freighter. The tugs have pads of rope on their bows and on their sides. The rope keeps the big boats from getting scratched. It protects the tugs, too. Now they use tires. The Joanna's captain goes aboard the Nancy Brown. He climbs up a rope ladder to the bridge of the freighter. He waves his hand at the tugs. He blows his whistle. Soon the freighter is on its way to its dock. The tugs puff, puff hard at their work. They leave a white froth in the water. They puff and they push at the big giant. The Nancy Brown comes close to its dock. You see the little Joanna next to the giant Nancy Brown? The seamen throw big ropes down from the Nancy Brown to the dock. The ropes are tied fast to the dock. The Nancy Brown is safe at home. Soon she'll unload all of her bananas, but the little tugs have other work to do. They turn and chug away. Off puffs the Joanna. Her captain says, "Do you know what you have to do next, Joanna? You have to help push a big liner out of her dock, so chug along now." The Joanna chugs up the river. A big liner is waiting at her dock. She is ready for a long ocean voyage to Europe. 6 other tugs are there to help too. The great liner lets the ropes go, which hold her to the dock. Her engines begin to roar. The little tugs push their noses against her, and they puff and they tug and they pull, and the tugs push the liner out into the river. They swing her around towards the bay. Her propellers kick up a white froth. Off steams the liner. Toot! The Joanna has helped her off on her long voyage. Ding dong! The Joanna's cook rings the bell for lunch. Good, says the captain. Lunch is what this captain needs. He turns and calls, "Hey there, Mr. Mate. It's your turn at the wheel." The mate comes rushing up to the pilot house. The captain turns the wheel over to him. He rushes downstairs to the galley. Some of the crew are there already. The captain and the crew sit down at a long table. The cook brings them meat and potatoes and other good things to eat. There are 8 men in the crew of the Joanna, all big and strong. They work hard all day, and they must have plenty of good food. The Joanna works hard all day too. She brings in big freighters. She starts great liners off on long voyages. She takes ship outside of dry dock. She tows barges up the river. She starts oil tankers off to South America. The barges in the front. It's late in the day. When the Joanna's work is done, she goes to her own dock and is tied there safely for the night. Her crews leave the decks scrubbed clean and take off their work clothes. Then they go to their own homes. Now the Joanna may rest after a long day's work. There she is. So I like that little book. It's very much of its moment also, which is nice. Okay, so where were we? We are reading The Phantom Tollbooth, which many of you will be familiar with. And at this moment, Milo and the dog Talk are in the jail for having caused a disturbance in the marketplace in Dictionopolis. And they're now going to hear the witch's story. Chapter 6. Faintly Macabre Story. Once upon a time, this land was a barren and frightening wilderness, whose high rocky mountains sheltered the evil winds, and whose barren valleys offered hospitality for no man. Few things grew, and those that did were bent and twisted, and their fruit was bitter as woodworm. What wasn't waste was desert, and what wasn't desert was rock, and the demons of darkness made their home in the hills. Evil creatures roamed at will through the countryside and down to the sea, and it was known as the land of Null. Sorry, I'm just reading the comment that says the tugboat book one more time. I'm sorry. You'll have to deal with the chapter book now. Then one day a small ship appeared on the sea of knowledge. It carried a young prince seeking the future. In the name of goodness and truth, he laid claim to all the country and set to explore his new domain. The demons, monsters, and giants were furious at his presumption and banded together to drive him out. The earth shook with their battle, and when they had finished, all that remained to the prince was a small piece of land by the edge of the sea. I'll build my city here, he declared, and that is what he did. I'll show you. Before long, more ships came bearing settlers for the new land, and the city grew and pushed its boundaries further and further out. Each day it was attacked anew, but nothing can destroy the new prince's city. And it grow it did. Soon it was no longer a city, but a kingdom, and it was called the Kingdom of Wisdom. But outside the walls all was not safe, and the new king vowed to conquer the land that was rightfully his. So each spring he set forth with his army, and each autumn he returned, and year by year the kingdom grew larger and more prosperous. He took to himself a wife, and before long they had 2 fine young sons to whom he taught everything he knew, so that one day they might rule wisely. When the boys grew into young manhood, the king called out to them and said, I am becoming an old man, and can no longer go forth to battle. You must take my place and found new cities in the wilderness, for the kingdom of wisdom must grow. And so they did. One went south to the foothills of confusion and built Dictionopolis, the city of words, and one went north to the mountains of ignorance and built Digitopolis, the city of numbers. Both cities flourished mightily, and the demons were driven back still further. Soon other cities and towns were founded in the new lands, and at last only the farthest reaches of the wilderness remained to those terrible creatures. And there they waited, ready to strike down all who ventured near or relaxed their guard. The 2 brothers were glad, however, to go their separate ways, for they were by nature very suspicious and jealous. Each one tried to outdo the other, and they worked so hard and diligently that it was before long their cities rivaled even wisdom in size and grandeur. Words are more important than wisdom, said one privately. Numbers are more important than wisdom, thought the other to himself. They grew to dislike each other more and more. The old king, however, who knew nothing of his son's animosity, was happy in the twilight of his reign, and spent his days quietly walking and contemplating in the royal gardens. His only regret was that he had never had a daughter, for he loved little girls as much as he loved little boys. One day, as he was strolling peacefully over the grounds, he discovered 2 tiny babies that had been abandoned in a basket under the grape arbor. They were beautiful golden-haired girls. The king was overjoyed. They have been sent to crown my old age, he cried, and called the queen, his ministers, the palace staff, and indeed the entire population to see them. We'll call this one Rhyme and this one Reason, he said, and so they became the princess of Sweet Rhyme and the princess of Pure Reason, and were brought up in the palace. When the old king died, the kingdom was divided between his sons with the provision that they would be equally responsible for the welfare of the young princesses. One son went south and became Azaz, the unabridged king of Dictionopolis, and the other went north and became the math magician, ruler of Digitopolis. And true to their words, they both provided for the little girls who continued to live in wisdom. Everybody loved the princesses because of their great beauty, their gentle ways, and their ability to settle all controversies fairly and reasonably. People with problems or grievances or arguments came from all over the land to seek advice. And even the 2 brothers, who by this time were fighting continuously, often called upon them to help decide matter of states. It was said by everyone that rhyme and reason answer all problems. And now rhyme and reason. The years passed, and the two brothers grew further and further apart, and their separate kingdoms became richer and grander. Their disputes, however, became more and more difficult to reconcile, but always with patience and love, the princesses set things right. Then one day they had the most terrible quarrel of all. King Azaz insisted that words were more significant than numbers, and hence his kingdom was truly the greater. And the mathematician claimed that numbers were more important than words, and hence his kingdom was supreme. They discussed and debated and raved and ranted until they were on the verge of blows, when it was decided to submit the question to arbitration by the princesses. After several days of careful consideration, in which the evidence was weighed and all the witnesses heard, they made their decision. Words and numbers are of equal value, for in the cloak of knowledge one is warp and the other is woof. It is no more important to count the sands than it is to name the stars. Therefore, let both kingdoms live in peace. Everyone was pleased with the verdict. Everyone, that is, except the brothers, who were beside themselves with anger. What good are these girls if they cannot settle an argument in someone's favor? They growled, since both were more interested in their own advantage than in the truth. We'll banish them from the kingdom forever. And so they were taken from the palace and sent far away to the castle in the air, and they have not been seen since. That is why in all this land there is neither rhyme nor reason. And what happened to the two rulers? Asked Milo. Banishing the two princesses was the last thing they ever agreed upon, and they soon fell to warring with each other. Despite this, their own kingdoms have continued to prosper, and the old city of wisdom has fallen into great disrepair, and there is no one to set things right. So you see, until the princesses return, I shall have to stay here. Maybe we can rescue them, said Milo, as he saw how sad the witch looked. Ah, that would be difficult, she replied. The castle in the air is very far from here, and only one stairway which leads to it is guarded by fierce and black-hearted demons. Tok growled ominously, for he hated even the thought of demons. I'm afraid there's not much a little boy and a dog can do, she said, but never you mind, it's not so bad. I've grown quite used to it here. But you must be going, or else you'll waste the whole day. Oh, we're here for 6 million years, sighed Milo, and I don't see any way to escape. Nonsense, scolded the witch. You mustn't take Officer Shrift so seriously. He loves putting people in prison, but he doesn't care about keeping them there. Now just press that button in the wall and be on your way. Milo pressed the button, and a door swung open, letting in a shaft of brilliant sunlight. Goodbye, come again, shouted the witch as they stepped outside and the door slammed shut. Milo and Tok stood blinking in the bright light, and as their eyes became accustomed to it, the first thing they saw were the king's advisors rushing towards them. Ah, there you are. Where have you been? We've been looking for you. The royal banquet is about to begin. Come with us. They seemed very agitated and out of breath as Milo walked along with them. But what about my car, he asked. Don't need it. No use for it. Superfluous. Unnecessary. Uncalled for, cried the undersecretary. We'll take our vehicle, conveyance, rig, char-a-banc, chariot, buggy, coach, brougham, shandy-ran. They repeated quite quickly in order and pointed to a small wooden wagon. Oh dear, all those words again, thought Milo as he climbed into the wagon with Tok and the cabinet ministers. How are you going to make it move? It doesn't have a... Be very quiet, advised the Duke, for it goes without saying. And sure enough, as soon as they were all quite still, it began to move through the streets in a very short time, they arrived at the royal palace. I guess I'll read chapter 7. And then we'll stop for the day. The royal banquet. Right this way, follow us, come along, step lively, here we go, they shouted, hopping from the wagon and bounding up the broad marble stairway. Milo and Tok followed close behind. It was a strange-looking palace, and if he didn't know better, he would have said it looked exactly like an enormous book standing on end, with its front door in the lower part of the binding, just where they usually place the publisher's name. Once inside, they hurried down a long hallway, which glittered with chandeliers and echoed with their footsteps. The walls and the ceiling were covered with mirrors, whose reflections danced dizzily along with them, and the footmen bowed coldly. We must be terribly late, gasped the Earl nervously as they reached the tall doors of the banquet hall. It was a vast room, full of people loudly talking and arguing. The long table was carefully set with gold and linen napkins. An attendant stood by each chair, and in the center, raised slightly above the others, was a throne covered in a crimson cloth. Directly behind it was the royal coat of arms, flanked by the flags of Dictionopolis. That is the coat of arms. Milo noticed many of the people he had seen in the marketplace. The letterman was busy explaining to an interested group the history of W, and off in a corner, the humbug and spelling bee were arguing fiercely about nothing at all. Officer Ship wandered through the crowd, suspiciously muttering, "Guilty, guilty, they're all guilty," noticing Milo brightened visibly and commented in passing, "Is it 6 million years already? My, how time flies." Everyone seemed quite grumpy about having to wait for lunch. They were relieved to see the tardy guests arrive. "Certainly glad you finally made it, old man," said the humbug, cordially pumping Milo's hand. "As guest of honor, you must choose the main course." "Oh my," he thought, not knowing what to say. "Be quick about it," suggested the spelling bee. "I'm famished." Famished. As Milo tried to think, there was an ear-shattering blast of trumpets entirely off key, and a page entered announcing to the startled guest, "King Azaz, the Unabridged." And the king strode through the door and over to the table and settled his great bulk onto the throne, calling irritably, "Places, places, everyone, take your places." He was the largest man Milo had ever seen, with a great stomach, large piercing eyes, and a gray beard that reached his waist, and a silver signet ring on the little finger of his left hand. He also wore a small crown and a robe with the letters of the alphabet beautifully embroidered all over it. There is King Azaz. "What have we here?" he said, staring down at Talk and Milo as everyone else took his place. "If you please," said Milo, "my name is Milo, and this is Talk, and thank you very much for inviting us to your banquet. I think your palace is beautiful." "Exquisite," corrected the Duke. "Lovely," counseled the minister. "Handsome," recommended the Count. "Pretty," hinted the Earl. "Charming," admitted the Undersecretary. "Silence," suggested the King. Now, young man, what can you do to entertain us? Sing songs, tell stories, compose sonnets, juggle plates, and do tumbling tricks? Which is it?" "I can't do any of those things," admitted Milo. "What an ordinary little boy," commented the King. "Why, my cabinet members can do all sorts of things. The Duke can make mountains out of molehills. The minister splits hairs. The Count makes hay while the sun shines. The Earl leaves no stone unturned. And the Undersecretary," he finished ominously, "hangs by a thread. Can't you do anything at all?" "Here. We only use them when we absolutely have to," growled Azaz disgustedly. "Now, why don't you and Talk come up here and sit next to me, and we'll have some dinner." "Are you ready with the menu?" reminded the humbug. "Well," said Milo, remembering his mother had always told him to eat lightly when he was a guest, "why don't we have a light meal?" "A light meal it shall be," roared the bug, waving his arms. The waiters rushed in, carrying large serving platters, and set them on the table in front of the King. When he lifted the covers, shafts of brilliant colored light leaped from the plates and bounced around the ceiling, the walls, the floor, and out on the windows. "Not a very substantial meal," said the humbug, rubbing his eyes, "but quite an attractive one. Perhaps you can suggest something a little more filling?" The King clapped his hands, and the platters were removed. Without thinking, Milo quickly suggested, "Well, in that case, I think we ought to have a square meal of—" "A square meal it is!" shouted the humbug again. The King clapped his hands once more, and the waiters reappeared, carrying plates heaped high with steaming squares of all sizes and colors. "Ugh," said the spelling bee, tasting one. "These are awful." No one else seemed to like them very much, and the humbug got one caught in his throat and almost choked. "Time for speeches," announced the King, as the plates were again removed and everyone looked quite glum. "You first," he pointed to Milo. "Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen," started Milo timidly, "I would like to take this opportunity to say that and all that—" "That's quite enough," snapped the King. "Mustn't talk all day." "But I've just begun," objected Milo. "Next," bellowed the King. "Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, vanilla ice cream," said the humbug, bouncing up and down quickly. What a strange speech, thought Milo, for he'd heard many in the past and knew they were supposed to be long and dull. Hamburgers, corn on the cob, chocolate pudding, pudding, said the spelling bee in his turn. Frankfurters, sour pickles, strawberry jam, said Officer Schiff from his chair. Since he was taller sitting than standing, he didn't bother to get up. And so went down the line, when each guest rising briefly, making a short speech, and resuming his place. When everyone finished, the king rose. Pâté de foie gras, soupe bouillon, fraisin sur cloche, salade endive, fromage et fruits et demi-tasse, he said carefully, clapped his hands again. The waiters appeared immediately, carrying heavy, hot trays, which they sat on the table. Each one contained the exact words spoken by the various guests, and they all began eating with great gusto. Dig in, said the king, poking his elbow, looking disapprovingly at his plate. I can't say that I think much of your choice. I didn't know I was going to have to eat my words, objected Milo. Of course. Everyone here does, said the king, grunted. You should have made a tastier speech. Milo looked around at everyone busily stuffing himself and then back at his own appetizing plate. It certainly didn't look worth eating, but he was so hungry. Here, try some somersault, suggested the Duke. It improves flavor. Have a rigmarole, countered the Duke, passing the bread basket. Or a ragamuffin, seconded the minister. Perhaps you'd care for a synonym bun, suggested the Duke. Why not wait for your just desserts, mumbled the Earl indistinctly, his mouth full of food. How many times must I tell you not to bite off more than you can chew, snapped the undersecretary, patting the distressed Earl on the back. In one ear out the other, scolded the Duke, attempting to stuff one of his words through the Earl's head. If it isn't one thing, it's another, chided the minister. Out of the frying pan, into the fire, shouted the Count, burning himself badly. Well, you don't have to bite my head off, screamed the terrified Earl, and flew at the others in a rage. The five of them scuffled wildly under the table. Stop that at once, thundered Azaz, or I'll banish the lot of you. Sorry, excuse me, forgive us. Pardon, regrets. They apologized in turn and sat down glaring at each other. And there's the fight. The rest of the meal was finished in silence until the king, wiping gravy stains from his vest, called for dessert. Milo, who had not eaten anything, looked up eagerly. We're having a special treat today, said the king, as the delicious smells of homemade pastry filled the banquet hall. By royal command, the pastry chefs have worked all night in half the bakery to make sure that... The half bakery? Questioned Milo. Of course the half bakery, snapped the king. Where do you think half-baked ideas come from? Now please don't interrupt. By royal command, the pastry chefs have worked all night to... What's a half-baked idea? Asked Milo again. Will you be quiet? Growled Azaz angrily. But before he could begin again, 3 large serving carts were wheeled into the hall and everyone jumped up to help himself. They're very tasty, exclaimed the humbug, but they don't always agree with you. Here's one that's very good. He handed it to Milo, sliced, and through the icing and nuts, Milo saw that it read, "The earth is flat." People swallowed that one for years, commented the spelling bee, but it's not very popular these days, D-A-Y-S. He picked up a long one that stated, "The moon is made of green cheese," and hungrily bit off the part that said cheese. Now there's a half-baked idea, he said, smiling. Milo looked at the great assortment of cakes, which were being eaten almost as quickly as anyone could read them. The Count was munching contentedly on, "It never rains, but it pours." The king was busily slicing one that said, "Night air is bad air." "I wouldn't eat too many of those if I were you," advised Hawk. "They may look good, but you can get terribly sick of them." "Don't worry," Milo replied. "I'll just wrap one up for later." He folded his napkin around. Everything happens for the best. And that's the end of chapter 8, so we'll leave it there until tomorrow. Have a lovely afternoon, and it looks like the sun is finally coming out here. Bye.